Our world today is bedeviled with so many societal problems which are adversely affecting day-to-day living. Drug dependence or addiction has assumed a very alarming dimension as the physiological or psychological state of many youths is a thing of great concern. Consequently, international organizations, governments, and communities are raising concerns about the rising drug problem and what many youths have become owing to their indulgence in potentially harmful drugs. So this will be the focus of this edition of Frontiers. I'm Nancy Godiangunihu. Our guest is the President, African Council on Narcotics, Rebene Bassi. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Nancy. It's my pleasure to be here.
The program continues in just a moment. Once more, you're welcome to Frontiers, Rebene Bassi.
Thank you very much, Nancy. My pleasure to be here.
Now, the general impression is that there has been a prevalence in the abuse of illicit drugs, most especially during this period of coronavirus pandemic. What's your take?
Well, speaking empirically, I will tell you that there are no data to statistical data to support, such prevalence. However, having said that, I think that with time, the institutions of government that are responsible for gathering or carrying out survey to the effect would probably come up with certain outcomes after they have carried out such survey. And institutions like the National Bureau of Statistics, the Federal Ministry of Health, and the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, and such other institutions.
But do you agree with the fact that there has been a rise in prevalence?
What I believe is that the situation regarding the COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to a number of factors or issues that may tend to lead to a prevalence in substance abuse. For example, a number of persons have lost their loved ones. Some persons have lost their jobs. Some have lost their businesses. Others have lost finances. And others are not able to meet their day-to-day needs financially as a result of the pandemic. And all of these can lead to depression. And depression is a risk factor for substance abuse. So it is possible that there may be a prevalence. But I can tell you that the last time I checked, over 15 million Nigerians, were said to be involved in drug abuse and addiction.
Now, from your findings, what drugs top the abuse list in Nigeria at the moment as the Africa and the African continent at large?
I think for the most part, marijuana. And the kind of marijuana that is out there on the streets, and you can find this drug almost everywhere around the inner streets of this country, in the urban centers and the hinterland. It's the type that is laced with all kinds of other substances. So marijuana for the most part. Matter of fact, 2 out of every young man or woman, take marijuana. Then there is tramadol, and then you have amphetamines and methamphetamines and all kinds of depressants. Codeine, crack. Crack is very prevalent, in more recent times. And then cocaine also. And of course, inhalants are also very prevalent. And when we talk about inhalants here, we're talking about those who inhale aerosol, those who inhale glue, those who inhale markers. Even toilets, unfortunately, are even inhaled to get a high. So those are generally the drugs that top the list in terms of prevalence.
Yeah, you talked about marijuana and cannabis.
Yes.
These are the most abused,
Yes.
like you just said. So, however, some developed countries, from what we've gathered, have legalized the use of some of these drugs for treatment of diseases like cancer, glaucoma, epilepsy, and all that. A host of other diseases. Now, what's your opinion about this?
No, I think some states in the United States of America, okay? And I can tell you, Jamaica. I can also mention Holland. But you know, every people have their peculiar challenges. And so you do not copy what other climes or what's being done in other climes, line, hook, and sinker, without first investigating the implications, the consequences. I can tell you what's going on, you know, for the most part in some of these countries you may have alluded to or mentioned or I'm referring to, is the fact that they have found cannabis to have some valuable medical uses. And so research is going on, you know, to try to extract and make out useful, valuable medicinal substances from, you know, marijuana or cannabis. You understand? So we do not have to go the same way they are going, because there's a huge risk of legalization that may lead to having lots of junkies on the streets. You want to understand the fact that marijuana is like a gateway substance, a gateway drug. Now, the addiction process occurs this way. You take the first psychoactive substance, which could be cigarettes, which could be alcohol, and it acts on one of the 50 neurotransmitters that make up the central nervous system, CNS. And then excitation takes place. Pleasure occurs, particularly on dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that deals with that specifically. Soon after that, the effect thereof wears off. Another neurotransmitter of the 50 called serotonin, which deals with pain and tries to, you know, handle succor, as it were, you know, craves for replenishment or replacement. And then when that happens, addiction sets in. Of course, addiction is a biopsychosocial problem. Now,
so the drugs actually give pleasure?
Yeah, of course.
Some sort of
That's
pleasure.
why people do it. That's why they do it. Maybe in the course of time, we'll talk about, you know, factors that propel people or set people into substance abuse. So what then happens is that over a period of time, the individual taking this drug begins to develop tolerance. So the effect of a particular quantity that the individual takes would not give him the same level of pleasure that he desires. So he would now seek other drugs to increase the level of pleasure. And that's how addiction sets in. Now, when that happens, he's not only going to look for marijuana, he's not only going to look for tobacco and alcohol. A lot of people who smoke marijuana also take tobacco. They also take alcohol. He's probably going to achieve the same level of high. Want to take crack, cocaine, tramadol, you know, to achieve the same level of high. And before you know it, the person becomes junkie and totally useless. So if you legalize marijuana without taking some of the consequences in terms of effect on the human system into consideration, you may just be officially, you know, opening the gateway, you know, floodgate for, you know, serious sociological problems in this country, particularly amongst our youth at a time like this. So for me, I think those who are making this advocacy ought to be extremely careful, very, very circumspect.
So when somebody takes these hard drugs, the tendency is for the person to keep on enhancing.
Exactly. Once you take and you have enjoyed, it's like eating the forbidden fruit.
Yeah,
once
you have taking and you want to enhance the particular level.
Exactly, and you just keep graduating
without even knowing.
Because some people, for example, who have suffered schizophrenia or some form of mental disease who get taken to the hospital because they have had a crisis. When they go there, when they try to sedate them to get them to relax and, so they can give them treatment, give them attention, the sedation doesn't even work.
Their body has developed resistance or something.
Exactly. So that's what happens. So I think we need to be very, very careful. We need to be, and do people even think about the effect of marijuana against the medicinal value? Marijuana cripples the sperm, so it makes it difficult for the man whose sperms are crippled to impregnate a woman. Marijuana can affect the fetus in a woman. So the child that is born, the child that is born is going to have a smaller head circumference. It's going to be smaller in weight, and it's going to be much more susceptible to all kinds of ailments, sicknesses. You understand? He's going to have problems with growth. Sometimes you can suffer stillbirth or abortion for a woman. And so, and then it also affects. So there are a lot of consequences. These are things we must
tell us more
look
about
at
the consequences.
Yes.
So, what are some of the symptoms of drug abuse? This drug abuse.
Quite a number of them.
Yes.
Quite a number of them. For example, when somebody who has used alcohol over a period of time, can't think about anything else except alcohol, without which he can't do his work, can't go to sleep, without which, he can't write. That's a symptom of a drug addiction. And he will do everything possible, including sometimes killing or stealing, to get this drug. For example, if he wants to get a drug and somebody stands on his way, at that point, he would resist.
His life is so dependent on drugs.
Exactly. That's one. Two, when a person who usually was a very pleasurable individual, now becomes very aggressive and unfriendly, he isolates himself from members of the family, that's a symptom of addiction. When the person has to steal, things begin to get missing, or even begins to sell his own property, the property of his, maybe his parents, relations, just to acquire this drug, that's an indication of, a symptom of addiction. When the person who used to be ordinarily very neat, turns out to become shabby, unkempt, and very unpleasant, that's also, a symptom of addiction. And I've talked about isolation from other members of the family. It would normally be very pleasant, associate with other members of the family, and then suddenly he's no longer interested in that sort of a relationship. Keeps to himself. Now, for a child, for example, when his grades in school begin to drop, his grades begin to drop, he does not, is not interested in his parents showing interest in his personal conduct activities at home and all of that. That's an indication. He begins to keep strange friends, comes in and out, tells unnecessary lies. These are all symptoms, and quite a number of them.
Very many symptoms, actually. That will draw your attention to the fact that something is actually wrong at this moment.
Exactly, if you look carefully.
We will actually take a break now and continue with the program as we come back. You're watching Frontiers, and it will continue in just a moment. We're still talking with President, African Council on Narcotics, Repmene Bassi. Thank you for staying with us.
Yeah.
Now we move on. Everything we engage in as individuals has its own good or bad consequences. That's grave consequences. What health challenges are drug abusers, exposed to?
Well, ultimately, death. Death, ultimately. And a number of things can happen that would lead to death. Industrial accident can lead to death. Vehicular or road accident can lead to death. When the person's lungs are affected, his kidney, his liver are affected, such internal organs. And all kinds of, cancers are part of the health consequences of substance abuse or drug abuse. to put it in layman's
Does it mean
language.
that these drugs target the vital organs
No,
specifically?
well, not target as it were. Drugs are supposed to, particularly prescribed substances. Don't forget, drug abuse is the use of drug outside of medical prescription. So when you abuse it, you're doing so, you're doing so, of your own violation, and that's what amounts to abuse. Because the doctor who, prescribes the drug would prescribe the drug in reflection on a basis of diagnosis. What is the ailment? Maybe you would carry out, laboratory tests, and so after the test, the doctor takes a look and makes an analysis of this test, and then diagnoses, or prescribes, diagnoses the ailment based on the outcome of the tests that have been conducted in the lab, and then upon diagnosis, prescribes drugs. So the doctor understands which drug will fit or treat or deal with which ailment. But if you do not do that, then it amounts to drug abuse. That's why in certain countries, like in Cameroon, or some of these francophone countries in Africa, and elsewhere, you just don't go to a pharmaceutical shop and get drugs over the counter, OTC. No, you don't. You have to come with a doctor's prescription, and it's on the basis of the doctor's prescription that you are given a drug. So, as it were, this drug may have useful purposes or effects on the human system the same way they have harmful effects. So it's not as if the drugs all target vital organs, vital internal organs, aiming to destroy them. But it's because they are used outside of medical prescription that you have such effects or consequences.
Okay, they actually are supposed to be regulated.
Exactly.
Is there a correlation between drug abuse and, I know you've been mentioning some crimes that actually are associated with drug abuse.
Yes.
Can you mention more?
Well, see, let me put it this way. Many criminals, and perhaps no criminal who commits a violent crimes does so with clear eyes. They must set themselves on edge for Dutch courage, artificial courage. I don't know another word for Dutch courage. Illusionary courage. Because it is temporary. It soon fritters away. No criminal elements who commits a violent crime.
Fake. I think it's fake.
No criminal element who commits a violent crime would do so without the use of, certain psychoactive substances. Except maybe the crime, maybe it's an opportunistic criminal, or the crime just occurred unintended. You understand? It just occurred unintended on the spur of the moment. But if it was a crime by a career criminal, professional criminal, planned, criminal act, then the criminal element would, as a matter of necessity, to be able to gain the courage to take a gun, to threaten, and perhaps in the course of threats, shoot the individual that is the target of this crime, in homicide, in rape, in kidnapping, in terrorist activities, and such other crime. They set themselves on edge, they take drugs, they set themselves on edge for Dutch courage to do that. Then secondly, a lot of the drug cartels, they fight to protect their trade, their illicit trade. And so that's another level at which criminality is involved. In the course of protecting their trade, illicit drug trafficking, and transshipment, they could kill. And of course, apart from that, there's a lot of corrupt practices that are involved. Trying to bribe government officials to protect themselves, while they continue with their nefarious activities. So, and then some people who are involved with addiction, for example, may steal, and they will do anything, including stealing, sometimes even killing and maiming, to get the resources with which to procure the drugs for abuse. So these are the dimensions and levels at which there's a correlation between substance abuse and criminality. So there's no question no doubt at all about it, that there's actually a correlation, between this, criminality and substance abuse.
Yeah. Now, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA, is a government agency in Nigeria saddled with the responsibility of controlling and tackling the problem. Is there any correlation or maybe synergy between your organization and the agency?
Well, African Council on Narcotics, yes, presently is collaborating with the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, which is the official agency responsible or that has statutory responsibility for drug prevention, or in terms of, in fact, demand reduction and interdiction in the country, law enforcement administration. And but one thing I would say, if I may use this opportunity to say it, I think the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency at this point needs a lot of support from the federal government of Nigeria. I can tell you this, because the drug problem is so enormous. The problem is massive. We are not.
You're just scratching it.
We're just scratching it on the surface. We are not addressing the problem. The problem is more than you can imagine. It's huge.
It's escalating by the day.
And it's escalating by the break of each day.
Yeah.
I will tell you this. The American government realized this long ago, and they take the problem seriously. In the US, the budget for the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, it's about $51 billion US. In Nigeria, it's about 17 million. Now compare 51 billion to 17 million. And I doubt if they get up to 50%, if NDLEA gets up to, National Drug Law Enforcement Agency gets up to 50% of that annual budget, compared to the enormity of the problem. So, I mean, it would be good enough to use this opportunity to make a strong appeal to the federal government of Nigeria to take the problem more seriously, particularly as we continue to experience population explosion. I think that presently the population figure, by guest estimate, estimation, could be in the region of about 230 million. Now so you imagine that we're going to have more sociological problems, and the earlier we begin to tackle this, in fact, in reflection of certain geostrategic elements, the better for this country.
So you mean your organization is working?
Oh yeah, sure. I answered that question already.
Yeah,
we're working in concert.
Because I wanted you to actually elaborate
we're working in concert. We're working in concert. African Council on Narcotics, for the most part, is a non-governmental organization. We do research, drug demand reduction activities, campaigns, advocacy, and all of that. And NDLEA, on the other part, being a government institution, is responsible for drug enforcement administration, which targets, in terms of specificity, has to do with drug enforcement. That's law enforcement, interdiction, investigation, arrest, prosecution, and then incarceration of suspects and persons involved. So how have they been
helping you in prosecuting offenders?
Well. They are helping African Council on Narcotics to prosecute offenders. What African Council on Narcotics strives to do is to complement the work and activities of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency in the area of drug demand reduction by way of advocacy, campaign, creation of conscientization amongst our people, education, talked about awareness, publication, research, and if there are, along the line, areas of collaboration, we partner, we collaborate with them.
On that note, I want to thank you, Mr. Rebene Bassi, President, African Council on Narcotics, for coming on Frontiers.
It's my pleasure, Nancy. Always, I'll be glad to be here.
I've been speaking with the President, African Council on Narcotics, Mr. Rebene Bassi, on the rising cases of illicit drug use in Nigeria and Africa. Remember to observe all hygiene and safety protocols to stop further spread of the coronavirus pandemic and ensure you get vaccinated. Thank you for your time.